The year is 1906. Perhaps bored of the last century without a major war in Europe, Britain and Russia are playing a never-ending game of diplomacy to pass the time. The Great Game for control over Central and Southwest Asia. I say, Nikki, you seem a bit short-staffed today. Still tied up in Japan, are you? Yes. Just a temporary diversion.
I want a constitution.
Nikki! What? You muppet, look what you've done! You've shown weakness, now the Iranians think they're in charge. Well, that's no fun. This is our game. What do the Iranians want with Iran? A constitution is what the Iranians wanted with Iran, and a constitution they would have, as well as a parliament. Gentlemen, I congratulate you all. With a great victory for liberty, we have brought democracy and the rule of law to Iran. I believe this is the beginning of a new era of freedom in the Middle East. Ah! Hands up! This man is your king now! All your oil is belong to Britain! In a gallant display of heroism, the British and the Russians returned law and order and authoritarian monarchy back to Iran. Parliament wasn't gone, though. They managed to muscle out the king, or Shah as he's properly called, and install a new one. That guy was sort of a nothing burger of a ruler, and the government pretty much stopped existing for 10 or 15 years. Trouble is, a British company had paid the Shah for rights to pretty much all of the country's oil before it was actually discovered, and if there's no central government, who's going to protect all that oil? I mean, for heaven's sake, Russia could just as well come in and annex the country. So the British helped stage another intervention. Everybody on the floor! Get on the floor! New Shah's in charge! Don't forget about the oil, old chum! Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the oil company. Uh-huh. Well, given the concession was by a non-democratic government under duress, we're not entirely satisfied with our current arrangement. So, the oil won't flow. The oil must flow, Reza. If the deal were made today, we'd have asked for 50-50 at least. The oil must flow. So, you'll settle for giving us 21% instead of 16%? For now. For now? What could possibly change? In 1941, Germany invaded Russia and was about to learn just what happens when you poke a sleeping bear with a stick. World War II was the largest and deadliest war ever fought, and Iran was a happy neutral country. So happy not to be war-torn. Look at them, aren't they sweet? Well, if we don't scoop it up, Hitler might take it. No, we can't have that. They didn't even declare war. I mean, for goodness sake, even the Kaiser had the decency to give Belgium a little heads up. We come in peace. We are only here to depose your leader. Meet the new Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was, as you might imagine, not a very assertive leader. Instead, as the Iranians brushed off the dust of their latest generational regime change, out pops a politician named Mohammad Mossadegh. He'd been a member of parliament since the 20s, but now he was campaigning for prime minister with plans to make Iran a lot of money. Prime Minister Mossadegh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Businessman McMoneyface, the pleasure is all mine. Your waiting room is very much. Yes, very much. And never enough, eh? This company is very dear to us British. We even nationalized it. It was such an important stream of revenue. Yes, the company sure seems to bring in a lot of money. Iran doesn't seem to be getting very much, though. I was hoping I could have a look at the bookkeeping. Nationalized the oil industry, you say? Mossadegh vows to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company and wins the premiership in a landslide. And nationalize he does with a nearly unanimous vote. The company is placed under control of the Iranian government in 1951. The British see this as a violation of a perfectly legitimate business agreement, not to mention a threat to their national interest, and so they meet with the Shah. When Mohammad Reza Shah took power in the 40s, his first priority was not letting the Soviet occupation of Iran turn into a Korea situation, and his second priority was living the good life. But he'd started to dip his toes into governance, and now he was invested. Mossadegh was a democratic leader who believed the Shah should be more of a figurehead, and the Shah didn't like that. Naturally, he and Churchill turned out to be perfect allies for taking Mossadegh down. Luckily, we've got just the thing for that. Now, your parliament, can they be bribed? It turns out the operation was going to be more complicated than paying Parliament to vote out the most popular politician since its founding. Oh, we leave you alone for 1 decade! Britain places an embargo on Iran, stopping any oil ships from leaving the country. But in the crisis, Mossadegh only becomes more popular. In fact, at one point, he resigns and is swept back into office by a stupendous wave of popular demand, and is given temporary dictatorial powers. Britain has to change tack. The key to bringing down Mossadegh is to subvert his popularity. Here I need to introduce a couple of key players. Power in Iran was contested by 4 parties. Besides Mossadegh and the Shah, there was the Communist Party and the Islamists, led by Ayatollah Kashani, a predecessor of sorts to Iran's eventual supreme leader. Kashani supported Mossadegh, and not always peacefully. But the two men didn't really have much in common. The Ayatollah was grateful to rid Iran of foreign influence, but Mossadegh was a secularist who believed in the separation of church and state. When it became clear to the Ayatollah that the man who didn't support Sharia law was not, in fact, going to implement Sharia law, the Ayatollah started supporting Mossadegh less, and the communists began supporting Mossadegh more, hoping that maybe the man who didn't support communism would implement communism. We shall have our agents begin to distribute propaganda. From this moment forth, Mossadegh is a communist who hates Islam. We'll set aside a fund to hire some locals with nothing better to do and get them to attack Mossadegh's opponents. I don't understand. Why would we want to criticize his opponents? Not with words, with weapons. Some young delinquent will physically assault a priest in the name of Mossadegh. It looks bad for him. No one will like him anymore. Capiche? Christ, this was so much simpler when we had an empire. Mossadegh eventually lost support in Parliament, but he was perhaps, more committed to Iran's economic independence than Britain had realized. He passed a referendum to dissolve Parliament and give himself the power to make law. The ballot wasn't secret, so everyone could see who you were voting for, and some violence in the streets meant that the referendum passed with a 99.9% approval rating. Hooray! If Britain wanted to oust him now, they needed to bring in the big guns. I'm sorry, the Iranians selling their own oil is your problem. But you see, Mr. President, Mossadegh is friends with these communists. Winston, I'm busy. Oh, that's my shift. Pleasure working with you, Mr. Prime Minister. All right, so he might not be best friends with the commies, but... Commies? Commies? Yes, commies! 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 That's it! Go get him, boy! All the pieces were in place. The Shah sends a messenger to Mossadegh's home with a warrant for his arrest. Mossadegh arrests the messenger, and the Shah has to flee the country. You know, sir, our reports show the communists aren't really commies! Commies! Lucky for Churchill, the Shah wasn't the only one in Iran willing to help overthrow Mossadegh. One of the Shah's generals was working with MI6 and the CIA, and when the coup went south, he decided to stay the course. He uses some of that CIA money to pay off enough people to launch a fake communist uprising, just big enough to convince the actual communists that the revolution had finally come. Commies? 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 The general then staged the counter-revolution too. He paid off a bunch of gangsters to start fighting back the communists in the name of the Shah and blaming Mossadegh for allowing the commies to get too much power. Regular Iranians join the fight, the mob storms into government offices, and Mossadegh has no choice but to flee the country. The Shah was in exile in Rome when he heard the news. They love me! They really love me! The Shah returned to Tehran and happily declared to the masses, "Today is a great victory for the Iranian people. No longer will this country be subject to tyranny, and no longer will Iran be forced to rely on the scraps of a British monopoly. I, Mohammad Reza Shah, have struck a deal with the British. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company is no more. Welcome to your new management."